On This Week in Enterprise Tech, Oracle goes on a spending spree, the enterprise gets disrupted in Las Vegas, and we're coming to you semi-live from Las Vegas Interop 2016. Twiat on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Twiat. This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 188, recorded 5 de Mayo 2016 for May 6, 2016. Interop 2016. This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Pfingst Canary. Detect attackers or malicious insiders on your network with honeypots that can be deployed in minutes. For 10% off and a 60-day money-back guarantee, go to canary.tools/twit and enter the code TWIT in the How Did You Hear About Us box. And by Igloo Software. Igloo is an intranet that you'll actually like. It connects people with the information they need to do their best work. Try it for free at igloosoftware.com/twit or sign up for a live demo to see it in action. Welcome to Twiat. This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Ballecer, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise. But of course, I'm not guiding you by myself. I've got my regular cast of characters, starting with Mr. Curtis Franklin, from Information Week Radio, who currently is inside of the Great Monolith, I think, because that's what his background looks like. Curtis, where are you?
Well, hard as it is to believe, I am not in the swamp today. I'm actually in the desert. I'm coming to you from the Media Center at the Interop trade show and conference. It is an interesting time here in the desert, but I'm glad to be able to be with the Twiat Riot, take a few minutes off the expo floor.
Absolutely, and we thank you for joining us. I know that it's been a busy time. I've been watching and listening to your coverage from both Interop and the big show before it, so it's been very helpful. Speaking of helpful, we welcome back our second spot co-host, Mr. Lou Maresca. Oh, wait, no, that's not Lou. That was the secret, Brian. Why did you...
Oh, no, I blew the lead.
Cranky Hippo just blew our surprise. But no, we've got Lou Maresca, Senior Development Lead with Microsoft. Lou, you are in a fresh new spot. Did you just get promoted?
No, I did get a new office, though. Much nicer view and some sun, so that's why I can go against the windows and get a little bit of better color.
Nice, nice. Well, we've got you on because, we wanted to get your angle on some of the stories that we're going to be covering. Now, the surprise that was supposed to be here, but unfortunately my TD Cranky Hippo blew it, was the fact that Brian Chee is not acting as a regular co-host this week. In fact, he is our man on the show floor. Brian Chee, can you tell us where you are right now?
I'm actually in the Mandalay Bay Convention Center on the Interop show floor. We're actually doing Internet of Things demonstrations. Lots and lots of fun.
Yeah. Now, Cheebert, we're gonna leave Cheebert out for just a bit because we want to bring you that special piece from the show floor. But, gentlemen, as we always do every week, let's get straight into the blips. This first one is all about Oracle making a play with $1.2 billion in expenditures. Last week, Oracle paid $663 million for Textura, a cloud services company that caters to the engineering and construction sector. This week, they've picked up Opower, which provides cloud services to the utility sector for $532 million. With almost $1.2 billion in acquisitions in the last week, it seems that the Bay Area-based database giant is ready to shake the last of Larry Ellison's policy of ignoring cloud computing, or as the former CEO once said to a financial analyst in 2008, what the hell is cloud computing? All brevity aside, the strategic purchases of Textura and Opower give outsiders a pretty good look at what Oracle's cloud computing strategy will be. Opower gives Oracle a client roster that includes PG&E, Exelon, and the National Grid, along with 600 billion meter readings from 60 million customers in a $2.3 trillion energy industry. Textura processes $3.4 billion in payments a month for about 85,000 contractors and subcontractors on more than 6,000 projects. Together, Oracle has instantly created the largest provider of mission-critical cloud services to energy and construction.
Viv wants to help you do, well, everything. Viv, a company that's on the cusp of coming out of stealth mode, wants to be the voice-oriented AI personal assistant that we've all been waiting for. And Viv might just get what it wants. The new digital personal assistant was developed by Dag Kitlaus and Adam Chair, who also developed Siri. Apple bought Siri in 2010, but Kitlaus and Chair were disappointed with how Siri was implemented on the iPhone and decided to strike out on their own. The biggest issue Kitlaus and Chair hope to tackle with Viv is the conversational way people speak. They want the AI to adapt to you rather than the other way around. The key differentiator here is how Viv helps people interact with services. Viv has partnered with some 50 companies in order to help people fulfill their requests. Kitlaus and Chair are prepared to reveal Viv at a technology conference on May 9th, but what's not yet clear is precisely how they plan to distribute Viv. It could be an uphill battle given the digital personal assistants already on the market, but the odds are good that Viv will help move the market one way or another.
Pivotal, the neutral ground big data company. Pivotal has $253 million in new funding in a new round led by Ford Motor Company, with additional contributions from big names at Microsoft. Previous backers like EMC, VMware, and General Electric also contribute. So what is Pivotal, you ask? Well, Pivotal is a spin-off corporation led by former VMware chief Paul Maritz, aggregating technology from both EMC and VMware, as well as a variety of other open source platforms to help provide big data solutions across the market. Pivotal continues to pivot their expertise and focus to help the market expand as the needs grow for big data analytics. Pivotal now has agreements with and partnerships with Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud Platform, making it the neutral player in the industry for big data solutions.
Hey, let me ask you a quick question. Do you run sites using SHA-1 certificates? Well, if so, you're about to disappear from the Microsoft world. Towards the end of 2015, security researchers demonstrated the ease with which they could craft fake SHA-1 certs that could fool users into thinking a counterfeit site was real and trusted. While Microsoft won't be actually blocking SHA-1 sites for now, both IE and Edge will stop displaying the lock icon for such sites, hopefully telling users that they can't necessarily trust it. And Microsoft isn't alone. Google, Mozilla, and other browser makers have all agreed to stop trusting SHA-1 by different timetables, and they'll be fully blocking such sites in the next few months. Bottom line, if you're an administrator running SHA-1, your security is bad, and you should feel bad.
Microsoft puts blinders on Bing. As part of an OS update, Microsoft has restricted Bing, its personal digital assistant, to work with Bing and Edge as the only search engine and browser. Microsoft says the restriction is intended to protect the Cortana user experience, which it created to rely on its own browser and search engine. Previously, workarounds allowed users to view search results on Google, Chrome, Firefox, and other third-party search engines and browsers. Microsoft rolled out several features for Cortana at the same time it announced these restrictions, which prevent the new capabilities from effectively working without Edge or Bing. We're now seeing two different directions for personal digital assistants, open or tied tightly to a single infrastructure. The market will tell us which is the right direction. In the meantime, let the battle of the PDA AI bots begin.
Free access to quantum computing for everybody. If you have a project in mind or in production that needs a bit more oomph in processing power, now is your chance to take advantage of the next generation processing platforms using IBM's quantum computing clusters for free. The new offer is only if they approve your access, and the application process will be a tough one. IBM is basing their approval on multiple aspects, including experience in quantum computing. The new IBM system uses 5 qubits, which in a quantum computing world, qubits are particles that can be in multiple states at once rather than the standard transistors used in today's computers, which is to be set to either 1 or 0. IBM thoughts around the project match with that of the open source initiative. The open and collaborative computing will move use forward faster than the cloud or than the closed door approach other corporations use.
Now, in the battle of wireless, not all spectrum is created the same, which is why it was a little surprising that such a large number of OTA television stations have agreed to throw their premium beachfront spectrum allocations into the FCC's upcoming incentive auction. While the FCC is not disclosing exactly how many stations turned over their spectrum, it was enough to amass 126 megahertz in the highly prized 600 megahertz range, the highest amount that the FCC anticipated would be available for the auction. Accounting for different policies in different areas of the country, the FCC will be able to auction 10 blocks of 10 megahertz each. While the 600 megahertz band is coveted, hundreds of TV stations throughout the country had been operating in that band. With this auction, those stations that gave up their spectrum rights will be eligible to move their OTA broadcast to other spectrum or, more likely, to take a cut of the $60 billion that is expected to be raised through the auction. Well, that does it for the blips. Coming up next, we've got the bites. But first, let's go ahead and thank the sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now, there are a lot of people out there who believe that the worst possible thing that could happen to your company is a breach. I mean, it's a nightmare losing confidential information of maybe financial statements, maybe personally identifiable information from your customers. It's a way to destroy your business. But the truth is, a breach isn't the worst thing that could happen. A breach that continues forever is the worst thing that could happen. That's why we're happy to have thanks to Canary as part of the Twiat Riot. A canary is a honeypot. It's a way to trick attackers into revealing their techniques, their vectors of exploitation, and what they're looking for on your network. You sprinkle a few of them into your network, make one look like a router. Another one looks like an unprotected Windows file share. A third is an IoT device, and you can even enroll them in your Active Directory so that to attackers, they don't look vulnerable, they look valuable. Now, they can be set up in as little as 4 minutes, so you can just sit back and wait for your canaries to start singing. And my favorite part is that once they start singing, you get a single alert when they identified verified attack activity. Now, this is important because alert fatigue from hundreds or even thousands of false positives are a great way to miss the real threats, the real attacks. Now, Thinx, the company behind Canary, has been in the security game for almost 2 decades. They train countless companies, militaries, and governments on how to break into networks, and they use that experience to build the Canary. You're probably thinking that security like this is going to cost way too much, but the beauty of the Canary system is that you can start with a few, then scale up as your network and your needs grow. Thinx Canaries are deployed around the world, from Iceland to Australia, with some of the biggest names in the Silicon Valley using them to identify threats before they become company-ending breaches. If they trust their Canaries, I'm thinking that you'll love yours. Check out canary.tools/twit. That's canary.tools/twit to get more information or to see them in action. For just $7,500 per year, you get 5 Canaries, your own hosted console, upgrades, support, and maintenance for a full year. And just for the audience of This Week in Enterprise Tech, if you visit canary.tools/twit and enter the code TWIT in the How Did You Hear About Us box, you'll get 10% off your Canaries for life. Now, we're so sure that you'll love your Thinx Canary, but if you're not happy, you can always return your Canaries within their 2-month money-back guarantee for a full refund. Again, visit canary.tools/twit, canary.tools/twit, and enter the code TWIT in the How Did You Hear About Us box to receive your 10% off. We thank Thinx and their Canaries for this support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Gentlemen, I want to move off to a story for the first bite. Story written by a man that I trust, written by, I think, a writer with great distinction, with great integrity, and one who can often glean the insights from every conference. Of course, I'm speaking of Curtis Franklin, who wrote an article about Vivek Wadhwa. He gave a presentation at the Information Week Elite 100 conference in Las Vegas. Vivek is a fellow at the Arthur and Tony Rembe Rock Center for Corporate Governance at Stanford University. Curtis, if I could get a little bit of information from you. First of all, what is the Information Week Elite 100 Conference? Who attends? What are the topics?
Well, the Information Week Elite 100 Conference is a conference wrapped around the Information Week Elite 100. This is where companies apply. They nominate themselves based on projects that they have completed in the last 12 months. Now, we get an awful lot of these, hundreds of these. The editors and a highly qualified panel of industry CIOs go through all of these, bring down the top 100, and these are recognized. And then, of course, we have awards within that for the most innovative, the top and best of the best. All of these folks come together once a year at the Elite 100 Conference. It tends to run at roughly the same time as the Interop show, because both are owned by the same corporate parents. But where Interop is all about networking and tends to bring people who are network engineers and administrators, IT managers, the Elite 100 is all about the CIOs and top-level executives. And they come together to learn from one another. Most of the presentations and panels are people who have made this year's Elite 100 talking about what they did, how they did it, what the implication was for the IT department and the organization as a whole. And then, of course, we do have a few plenary or keynote sessions with people like Vivek Wadhwa, who is there to talk and be thought-provoking for all of these CIOs. All in all, it is a relatively small gathering of top executives, and it is fascinating to hear what all of them are doing in their companies around the U.S.
Curtis, it is kind of fascinating that seems to be a trend. I have been invited to probably a dozen invitation-only conferences that have either 100 or fewer attendees. I think this is sort of a pushback against some of the larger shows, against an Interop or an Enterprise Connect or even a CES that has so much. It's people who don't need to know about the newest products because they already know about the newest products, but they want to talk to their colleagues, to their cohorts, and even their competitors, and maybe dream something up, which is why I was interested in the speaker. So they brought in Vivek Wadhwa. Who is he, and why should we listen to what he has to say? Because he was speaking about disrupting industry.
He was indeed. Now, Vivek started as an entrepreneur in the software industry. He has since left the world of entrepreneurship for the world of academia. As you mentioned at the beginning, he is a fellow at the Rock Center for Corporate Governance at Stanford. He's also on faculty at Duke University and Singularity University, and he writes about digital transformation. One of the key things that he studies is the pace or the rate of transformation, because he sees, and I tend to agree with him, that the rate is critical. What he did in the presentation at the Elite 100 conference is talk about a couple of things. Number one is the implications of that rate of change, and the other, the implications of where that rate is going to lead us. And he had some fascinating places where he thinks it's going to go. One of my favorites is based on the growing roboticization of manufacturing. He sees manufacturing returning to the U.S. One of the quotes that he gave was, American robots can work just as cheaply as Chinese robots. And once the cost of actual manufacturing comes down close to equal, then the cost of transportation starts to become a bigger and bigger factor. So if companies can eliminate shipping raw materials and finished goods across the Pacific, it becomes much easier just to manufacture things in the U.S. It was a fascinating talk, a lot of facts, a lot of opinions thrown out in machine gun fashion. But the key that he said was that the pace of digital transformation is such that it's almost impossible to accurately predict where things are going to be in 10 years, because we as human beings aren't used to thinking about change at the rate we're seeing. And so while he was offering a few nearer term predictions, they were with the caveat that even he can't see terribly far in the future, because it's almost certain that technology is going to outpace where even his imagination can take us.
They're having a conversation in the chat room about your robots line, or about his robots line, that American robots can work just as cheaply as Chinese robots. But of course, the American robots were probably made in China. So Go figure. But Lou, I want to throw it to you because one of the other things that came out in this presentation that Curtis teased out in his article was that Vivek talked about the whole idea of the startup threat, that this is something that is actually unique to the new millennium, where we talk about disruption a lot, new players coming in and disrupting the game, but typically a new player back in the 90s might take a decade, definitely a few years before they were enough of a threat to warrant changing the industry. One of the things that Vivek pointed out was the startup threat can now happen not in decades or years, it can happen in months or even weeks, where you have a new startup that announces something that is so earth-shattering that everyone scrambles to adjust. It's difficult for larger companies to adjust to those kinds of disruption. Of course, you work for one of the larger companies. What disruptions have you seen from this startup threat, and how do you think your company has reacted?
That's a good question. I think a lot of the times the startups will come into play and they'll have an idea and they'll spend a couple months on it, and then like you said, they'll bring out a product that kind of shatters some of the areas that, like for instance, artificial intelligence or business analytics or big data, that kind of thing. Those are kind of the buzzwords of today. And there's these small companies that will come out of nowhere, Pivotal being one of them, that have done some research for several months or a year, and then they'll just come out with this massive kind of game changer. And companies like Microsoft and other companies like Amazon and Google and so on will have to, adjust, and they'll have to say, you know what, this is something that we were going to do or we're going to try to do. Some of these small startups have niche kind of areas, but they meet a purpose in a scenario. And so, the big companies either have to, get something out just as fast, they'll scramble and set teams. And, most big companies, they have the resources to do it. So like, for instance, Microsoft would say, hey, we see a competitor that's coming along and that's doing something that we wanted to do, and it hits a particular niche market. Let me just throw a whole bunch of resources at it and see what we get out of it, some expertise in data science or so on, and see what happens, see what we get out of it. Run it like a startup and see what happens, in the next several months. What kind of prototypes or proof of concepts do we get out of it? And then can it be beneficial? And then they productize it within the next month or so, and they ship it maybe as a beta or something, and it starts to show that yes, we can also do this too. So I think that's kind of, you see that a lot from big players like Google and Amazon. They'll throw out these betas, these alphas that do very similar things, if not sometimes even better, because they have more access to data than these small startups. So I think that it almost flips around. The disruption part of it is that you might have these disrupting startups, but they don't have the influence nor the resources to sometimes sustain themselves when the big players jump into the game.
Right. Curtis, interesting if you could talk a little bit about whether Vivek addressed that. I know he talked about the startup threat. You described that very well. We know what the startup threat is. We've seen the startup threat. But as Lou said, you have a lot of these more traditional companies, the established companies, who are trying to sort of steal that mojo. As Lou said, act like you're a startup. And so Google has their labs and Microsoft has the garage. And these larger companies have these small units that are semi-skunk works that can operate independently and can just make a bunch of stuff at low risk. Did he talk about that at all as a way to respond to the startup threat?
Vivek talked only a little bit about that, but a lot of other people at the Elite 100 conference did talk about that sort of thing. And it's something that I've written other articles at Information Week about. As a matter of fact, recently I wrote something talking about I interviewed the CEO of a software company called Opower. Opower is a big player in the mainframe software business. And the CEO said that when he came on board a couple of years ago, Opower hadn't released a new product in 15 years. And he was charged with changing that and needed to look at getting the company to act like a startup. So what he did was take the entire company to the Agile discipline. A lot of companies are going to Agile for their development discipline. Some are taking Agile to all parts of the company. So you're getting into things like Agile HR, Agile marketing, Agile sales. And the Agile discipline, whether it's through Scrums or Kanban or any of the other frameworks, is something that many companies are making use of to try to inject that feeling of startup energy and, more important, startup pacing to an established business. Some are successful, some don't want to change. They're just trying to do a faster waterfall. But a lot of companies recognize that the threat is there from these new entrepreneurial startups because of the pace, and they have to do something to respond.
Right. Lou, I want to let you close up here because, of course, Curtis wrote the article, so I'm pretty sure he could give us all the analysis that we need. But Vivek also talked a little bit about digital medicine versus traditional medicine. He talked about command versus communications, and all these interesting binaries that we have in the enterprise that right now seem to be flipping. You want to be quicker and more agile rather than more dominant. You want to be more digital rather than bound in paperwork. When Microsoft looks at a conference like this, at an Elite 100, and again, they're happening more and more. In fact, I know Microsoft has a couple. I was invited to a few interesting briefings. What do you think that they're trying to inspire? I mean, as they invite other enterprises into these same conferences, as they invite their competitors to actually speak with them, what's the end game here?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think the end game is that there's, like you said, it's more of an inspiration and to kind of move things forward because, Microsoft, as you know, it is a cloud service company, and they know that, and so are these other large corporations, and they know that if they inspire and help promote, small business, like for instance, the BizSpark program is huge, where, they give you free Azure and free, and allow you to use Visual Studio and all these things, and they promote you to use these technologies to kind of get your startup and your business going. And the same thing goes for all these other companies too. And I think, by promoting this crosstalk, this collaboration, and understanding how different big players and small players are doing things, it allows the industry to move forward. And not only that, but it also allows the industry to really take utilization of some of these tools and get ourselves some services and software that we didn't necessarily have before. So I think that's kind of the major motivation behind all of this, is not only get the ideas out there and get people moving, but also really understand that there's tools there to help you to do it. And not only do we want to have you use those tools, we also want to have you help us improve those tools. So I think that's kind of the major motivation. And not only that, but it's true. I mean, you can start a small startup by using some of these services, not only, especially for free development, sometimes even production scenarios. And you get yourself moving, and you can even feedback and help them promote and move these services forward to help benefit yourself and your application or your product. So I think that's kind of to me, that personally, that's the major motivation behind it.
Lou Maresca is a senior development lead with Microsoft. He is a friend and my co-host here on This Week in Enterprise Tech. We got to let you go because you do have a hard out, and you made time for us, so thank you very much. Could you please tell the folks at home where they can find you and find your work now that you're in your fancy new office?
Absolutely. You can always find me at LouMM on Twitter. And, of course, all the work they do here at Microsoft, you can find me at crm.dynamics.com.
Lou Maresca, we will see you next time on This Week in Enterprise Tech. Until then, get back to work.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Folks, we're not just going to drop Lou out and leave you hanging. We're going to bring back in another face that you may have recognized, and he's at a place that we definitely need to talk about. Mr. Brian Chee, he is the director of the Advanced Network Computing Laboratory in Honolulu, Hawaii. Normally he is in a co-host spot, but today he's in a guest spot because he's coming to us from the Interop Net Labs at Interop Las Vegas. Chee, how you doing today?
I'm really tired.
Okay.
We had a fairly short fuse to put this together, and we actually have a multi-layered demo that we'll talk about. And the friends behind us that are photobombing me all banded together to build a very large network in a very short amount of time.
By the way, that's Cyberdog behind you, Cyberdog from the chat room. So if you ever see him, you can just say that he actually photobombed the Twitch stream. Cheever, we're going to talk about labs because you have been responsible for the Internet of Things that have been deployed around that network. But first, what I wanted to do was to talk with you and with Curtis about the changing mission of Interop. Well, we've talked about this in the past. We know where Interop came from. Now, you, I, and Curtis have been part of Interop for several decades now, combined, actually. Brian, you and I have actually been part of the team that builds the Interop net for a good number of its 30 years. However, what we've seen in the last few years is that the mission of Interop and the mission of other shows like it has slowly changed. Can you remind the folks where Interop started, how it started, and why it started?
Well, in reality, Interop started as a knee-jerk reaction. Dan Lynch and a bunch of other people wanted a way. You couldn't buy pre-built equipment. There's no way to test to make sure that they've implemented this brand new technology called TCP/IP. So in 1986, in a cafe in Monterey, California, a bunch of people by invitation got together and brought their equipment. A lot of times these were prototypes, one of a kind, engineering prototypes that he brought in and tried to do a plug fest. Did I implement that brand new technology called TCP/IP correctly? And Interop was born. The vendors were able to go and test. In a lot of cases, competitors were helping each other because this was so new, they weren't even quite sure how the standards worked. And over the years, though, the standards have gotten better and better. People have gotten a lot better at writing the specifications so there's less ambiguity. And as a result, you don't need to bring your gear to Interop anymore to test compatibility, but there is still an air of trying out new things. And Interop is, again, trying out some new things, and that's what the Interop of Things demonstration is. We're actually doing a bunch of different demonstrations, and we'll see if we can brush off that air of discovery again.
Yeah, and that's what we want. Curtis, let me throw over to you, because Cheebert's been describing the early days of Interop. Again, starting in that cafe in Monterey. It was an invitation only, 65 companies, 65 different representatives who were brought together to make their gear work with one another. We remember this because, frankly, the three of us are old people. But, Curtis, there was a time when you couldn't guarantee that an Ethernet switch from one vendor would speak with an Ethernet switch from another vendor.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that you can credit Interop to a certain extent with the fact that that's no longer a concern. When you get down to basic network appliances, switches, routers, security gear, all the various bumps on a wire that we tend to put into the network, getting them to pass packets back and forth isn't really an issue. We assume that TCP/IP is going to work to let us get packets from one part of the conversation to another. The key now is all of the stuff that goes on around, from whether it's management or security, defining networks via software on an automated basis. We've, in one sense, moved up at least a layer or two on the list of concerns. And I think that as the industry has done that, Interop is in the process of doing that as well.
Cheeber, let's talk a little bit about the Interop Labs, because this has been an important part of the history of Interop. Let's just talk about a few of the things that maybe if they weren't first done at Interop, they were best done at Interop for best practices. Routing versus switching, Ethernet versus token ring, SIP and VoIP, wireless, which would become Wi-Fi. I believe that was the 2004 show. Colo versus cloud, virtualization, the Internet of Things. All of those topics either started at or were made really popular by some of the people at the Interop Labs. And in fact, I know that last one, Internet of Things, people are saying, wait a minute, no, the Interop couldn't have been at the first. Actually, Interop had an Internet of Things in 1989. Cheeber, you want to talk a little bit about that, the sensor project?
Oh, that sensor project is infamous because we call our equipment racks PEDs, which harks back to the 1986 event where they put the equipment on bar pedestals. We had a BPED. It was a Liebert little glass shack, and we actually wrote a custom SNMP MIB so that you could monitor the level of the beer keg. We wanted to make sure it was nice and frosty and that it was not empty. It was a lot of fun calibrating those sensors.
Exactly. And so there again, there's that history of discovery, that history of being awed by technology that has made Interop so fun. But now, gentlemen, I want to step a little further because you look at a show like Interop, and it's, let's be honest, it's not nearly as big as it used to be. The conference is still doing incredibly well. There's still people who go to the classes. There's executives who show up for the briefings. But if you look at the show floor, it gets a little bit smaller and a bit more select every year because our industry has really become commoditized. You can count on switches and firewalls and IDS, IPS boxes from one vendor working with gear from another vendor. So many people have raised the question of, is Interop necessary anymore? Chee, when someone comes up to you, and people have come up to both of us and said, is Interop going to survive? Can Interop continue to be the place to figure out what kind of gear you want? What do you tell them?
Well, I tell them that Interop really and truly is about discovery. There's the discovery of new protocols, joining the club every day. And what we're doing in the Interop labs is exactly that, the discovery on Internet of Things. What's really happening is the enterprise wants access to a lot of data. They want to know more and more about what's happening in their products, what's happening in their enterprise. But they don't necessarily want to spin up an entire development team to bring that to bear. So what's changing in the Interop of Things world is there's a lot of middleware reappearing. The guys exactly behind me, Chris Stradman and Bill Jensen, are actually demonstrating some of the new gateway technologies. We all know how badly certain Internet of Things products have actually been implemented. You know, things like the simply unsafe home security system. But what gateways allow us to do is be able to put a cap on that. And since each of these commodity Internet of Things typically have their own idea of what an API should be, the gateways provide a way of cross-pollinating data between the different silos and then providing a secure way of bringing the data up into the cloud or into your data system. So some of the things they're demonstrating there are things like MQTT, Stomp, Node-RED from IBM, and so forth. And they're also providing some demonstration on a Z-Wave gateway system, so you can bring in your Z-Wave or Zigbee devices and integrate them into your enterprise Internet of Things.
Curtis, I'm with Chee. I always came to Interop, and I loved Interop because I got to play. I got to use technologies that maybe I hadn't used before. I got to sit with the people who actually created them. I got to sit with people like Stradman, like Chee, and actually be tutored in their usage. So for engineers, for IT geeks who like to get their hands dirty, Interop is still fun. It's still a playground. I think where we've seen a lot of the drop-off has been sort of at the executive level, where you don't have the same number of CTOs and CIOs coming into a show like Interop because they can get most of the information off the internet. Is this a real thing? Is this an imagined trend? Or is this the way of the future for shows like Interop or like Enterprise Connect, like any other show that does IT?
Well, I'm going to preface this with the statement that I am not an official spokesperson for Interop. So what's about to follow is my observation, my opinion only. And this is also just a little bit of what we'll call inside baseball, because one of the functions of a trade show like Interop or any other is for vendors, manufacturers to bring their customers in, their existing customers, and make them feel appreciated. We're all old enough to remember some of the epic parties that went on at shows like Comdex, and that to a certain extent still go on at places like CES. Those aren't designed to really win new customers. Those are designed to make existing customers feel good about their purchase and buy more. Well, what the vendors have learned is that purpose is more effectively served at their captive events. So you have Oracle and Cisco and SAP and all of the major vendors who have their own huge events that they invite their existing customers to, and they make them feel really good. They'll have huge entertainment. They'll have executives there to tell them how special they are, all those kinds of things. That means that Interop and the shows like it, as you say, become educational and become ways to reach new customers. And that changes the dynamic. Both the shows and the manufacturers have been working through that for the past decade. And I think that both sides are starting to figure it out. Here at Interop, we're seeing lots of emphasis on the conference, on the educational part, on the demonstration portion, like we're seeing with Brian in his lab. And we're also starting to see the manufacturers, the exhibitors, who want to be part of an audience that is here to be educated and informed, figuring out why and how to reach them so that they're talking and delivering those messages rather than the messages of reassurance to their existing customers.
Absolutely. Cheebert, I want to give you the last word, because what Curtis talked about was sort of the expansion through a show like Interop, that it can still be useful as long as it transforms itself. You have a different angle on Interop, and I think it's the same angle that I have, because Interop for me wasn't just a conference, it was summer camp for geeks. Can you talk a little bit about the human side of a show like Interop?
One of the first lessons I always provide to my students is the best network engineers aren't the ones that know everything. It's too big an industry. The best engineers are the ones that know who to call. And that really and truly is what Interop is about. It is a social event for geeks to cross-pollinate ideas. What I see more than not is I'll see people huddling on coffee tables around the show venue. I'll see people huddling in booths, scratching away at napkin diagrams. What Interop really is a fertile environment for the exchange of ideas. And I would be horrified if it ever went away, because more ideas have been born out of this type of conference than anything else. A CES is just too big. You can't hear yourself think. And Interop is a right-sized conference that is great for encouraging the exchange of ideas, the exchange of techniques, the exchange of just associations of people. Because we all know that engineers tend to hop around. Well, this is where you do a lot of your hiring searches and so forth. And it's someplace where you can do the human side of networking.
So who are you going to call? Interop. Gentlemen, when we come back, we're going to go straight into Interop. Let's talk about what you've seen around the show, Curtis, what you've seen before the show. And Cheebert, you can tell us about the Internet of Things Labs, because if people want to know what's going to be the next great area of network expertise, you can always trust on the iLabs to provide. But before we do that, let's go ahead and thank the second sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech. And hey, Enterprise folk, can I ask you another question? How are your networks behaving today? Are your 10 base T repeaters doing well? What about those ISDN lines? Are they behaving? Are your cutting-edge 486 desktops still doing as well as they did when you first bought them? Well, of course not, because all that equipment is old, and there's no way that you still have it in your infrastructure, which is puzzling then, because why is it that some of us are still using intranets that were designed in the 90s? Sure, it was nice back in the day, giving you what you needed to do your business at the time. But today, that one-click intranet is painful, stale, ugly, and most likely inaccessible unless you're at work, which is why we're so happy to have Igloo as a supporter of the Twilight Riot. Now, Igloo is an internet that you'll actually like. It's a cloud platform that enables you to share files, collaborate on documents, blog updates, coordinate calendars, and manage projects, all from the same attractive and intuitive interface. Of course, access to all that information needs to be protected, so Igloo baked in SSL and 256-bit encryption services into the platform. This lets you securely grant access to drag-and-drop widgets, a WYSIWYG editor, and permission-based content just to the users who need it. Unlike a lot of other solutions out there, Igloo lets you customize your platform and integrate your existing IT investments. This isn't a forklift upgrade where you have to throw away everything that came before it. You can use your Office 365, Salesforce, SharePoint, Active Directory, and file sharing solutions like Google Drive and Dropbox, all within your Igloo. You can even add Zendesk to keep track of or add new support tickets. Most importantly, with your branding, with your look and feel, your users will be able to see and access all the resources that you've made available to them in one attractive interface that is accessible on the desktop, on mobile, pretty much everywhere you might want to work. It's used by large enterprises and growing companies like User Testing, BDO, American Family Insurance, and ATP World Tour. They get it. You should too. Here's what we want you to do. We want you to sign up now and try it for free, gratis, nothing, at igloosoftware.com/twit. That's igloosoftware.com/twit. And when you sign up through our link, you can get your own Igloo for up to 10 people absolutely free for as long as you want. Once again, that's igloosoftware.com/twit. And we thank Igloo Software for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Gentlemen, let's get to it. Curtis, let me start with you because I know you've been busy. I know that you were covering the Elite 100 show. But what's been the news out of Interop? What's the buzz? What's the thing that has been the draw this year?
I think that there are two broad trends that we're seeing. One of them is the continued use of computers and networks as collaboration devices. Now, Padre, you and I were at Enterprise Connect earlier this year, and we saw a lot of these collaboration products there. That's continuing at Interop with perhaps an emphasis on the network side rather than the human interface side. But that's one big thing. The other is the Internet of Things, but a specific read on the Internet of Things, and that is the industrial Internet of Things. So rather than wearables and home control and things like that, this is talking about sensors that help corporate analytics packages come up with predictive maintenance algorithms. So knowing ahead of time that a truck or a piece of manufacturing equipment is going to fail, alerting people that something has gone wrong, like the demonstration that Brian has put together out there in the lab. So those are the two big trends that I'm seeing, the collaboration and the industrial Internet of Things. And between them, there's an awful lot going on.
I actually have a video for the collaboration that would be fantastic, but I don't want to play it now because we're running out of time, and I want to have enough time to talk to Chee about the Internet of Things. I mean, you're talking about how it's becoming more practical. Internet of Things has been this sort of nebulous cloud of devices, most of which aren't really enterprise hardened. They're not really enterprise ready. Chee, what have you been showing off for that kind of enterprise Internet of Things at the labs?
Well, actually, the primary demo that we're doing is based on Cisco Tropo. And the demo is basically I'm punching a button to simulate a water main break. And everybody hates, we want the water main breaks and potholes that it creates fixed as quickly as possible. And this demonstration is showing how a municipality could detect a water main break using some various types of sensors. It automatically kicks off a text-to-voice system calling the residents in the area, telling them there's been a water main break. Until further notice, please consider boiling your water. But simultaneously, the Tropo system is kicking off a WebEx so that the key players that are going to make the fixes happen can exchange information and also provide a level of transparency to the residents of the area with a virtual town hall meeting. In fact, even if the fire chief is out in the field, as they want to be, I'm actually showing how I'm kicking off a WebEx from my iPad and participating live on that iPad. So additionally, we're also purposely degrading the network at each desk. We're using Interworking Labs and the KMAX. And the idea is I'm degrading the network as if I was sitting in Auckland, Beijing, or Cape Town. because one of the things that a lot of people don't do is they don't do enough testing. Is your application sensitive to jitter or out of order packets? Is your application not going to work if there's a large amount of delay? So it is a multi-layered demonstration that also includes people like Lantronix with OEM Internet of Things components, Open Gear with terminal servers with environmental sensors where you can actually get the status using an SMS message, all the way to the guys right behind me that are dedicated to telling people about the new generation of gateways that I described early in the show, MQTT, Stomp, Node-RED, and so forth, to try and integrate consumer Internet of Things into something that's more usable and more secure.
Cheebert, that last part, more secure, this has sort of become an ongoing rant against Internet of Things. In fact, here on the show, we've called it the Internet of Insecure Things, or the Internet of owned things. And, you know, that's problematic because, as Curtis explained, we're just starting to see real tangible benefits from having these sensors deployed on an enterprise. You know, it makes sense if you can do predictive analysis and predictive failure proceedings. But people are worried that you just don't have the security in it, and suddenly you're opening up something that should not be open to the outside world. Have you been doing best practices work at the labs? In other words, as people come by and they see your demonstrations, have they been asking about whether or not this would be secure to put on the internet?
Well, one of the things I actually have noticed, you know, we have certainly been doing that type of thing. One of the things I've noticed is I've been playing with things like Cayenne and Initial State, where they're Internet of Things portals. And I've been sending data to it from Raspberry Pis and also the Wheel Link by Seed Labs. The one thing that's really become more and more common is that more and more of these people are actually using TLS as the transport. They're not just relying on, you know, something like an HTTP post where anyone can spoof it. So the Internet of Things industry is changing. I kind of equate it to when Wi-Fi first started out. You know, we all know how WEP was broken and it got better and better. It's not going to be the first thing out the gate. It's going to be an iterative process where the IoT industry is going to grow up. And I think this becomes a really interesting new niche for the Interop show because the Internet of Things is being integrated into the business line very, very rapidly.
Curtis, that's not the first time that I've heard the Internet of Things compared to Wi-Fi, how it developed and it slowly evolved into something better. But IDC actually put out a report that was a little troubling about this because they said, unlike the Wi-Fi revolution, where we slowly got better and better wireless connectivity from 802.11b, A, G, and AC now, we are now deploying devices that are expected to be in the field for years, if not decades. And they can't be replaced like we replaced Wi-Fi devices. I think the correlation that they used was the average Wi-Fi device that was bought in 2004 was replaced every 18 months. That's not going to happen with the Internet of Things, so we don't get that same cycle of being able to revamp hardware once we realize it's insecure. Are we looking at, as the Internet of Things gets deployed, setting up 3 decades or more of vulnerabilities?
Well, if the devices that go out there are vulnerable, then absolutely. Yes, a vulnerability in most devices that exist today will still exist throughout its lifespan. And as you say, some of these are going to be extended lifetimes. So that is a legitimate concern. I think that's why we have to look at layered security on many of these devices, recognizing that there are limits to how secure we can make based on existing technology, and build security into other parts of the application and the network. You know, this is something that that Brian has preached for a long time, the notion of layered security. And I think that manufacturing, and by extension the Internet of Things, is one of those applications where we have to look at deeply layered security and trying to enforce any security at all.
Cheebert, I'm going to throw back to you because you are sitting in the middle of the Internet of Things labs. Looking forward, looking to next year, because Interop is a shorter event. The show floor is only open till the end of today. You'll be tearing this down in just a few hours. What are you looking forward to at Interop 2017? What is the thing that you think is going to be a great project for the labs, or that you can take into your own lab in Honolulu and start working on?
Well, some of the goals that we have is to do a greater amount of integration. Unfortunately, the lead time on this particular project was a little too short, and I want to bring in things like Splunk, Hadoop, and various other big data analytic systems so we can start integrating the data from more and more data sources. I think one of the other things I want to do is I want to start bringing in some of the emerging security systems from places like SonicWall, WatchGuard, and so forth, and take a good hard look at how we can make this the Internet of secure things rather than the network, rather than the coffee table joke that some of the Internet of insecure things have become.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you so very much. It's always fun when we get to do our Interop episode. This year was a little different. We weren't all three of us at Interop. In fact, Chee and Curtis, you're in the same building, but you're in different parts of the building. So we're doing something weird this year. Gentlemen, last words. Being at Interop, being at a show like Interop, what would you recommend for our audience? Should they find a place near them that does a show like Interop? Should they fly out to Vegas for Interop, or should they just keep listening to shows like Twiat and we'll give them all the goodness?
Well, I'm going to go first and say that obviously everyone should come on out to Interop every year. It really is, I think, an unparalleled opportunity to meet the smartest people in networking, talk to them, learn from them, extend your personal contacts. But in addition, go ahead and do find those local user groups, the local events. Build your human network, because you'll find that in doing so, you vastly improve your ability to build the best data networks.
I kind of like large trade shows because there's a greater number of opportunities to have a synchronous conversation with subject matter experts. I've had some amazingly deep conversations with people in the different booths about products. And with the synchronous conversation, I'm able to think of new questions on the fly. The face-to-face, there is no replacement for that. And large trade shows make a huge amount of sense in this day and age, especially with dwindling budgets, because you can take that smaller travel budget and turn it into really, really big rewards.
Well, folks, I'm sorry, but you've done it again. You've used up another hour listening to the best dang enterprise podcast in the universe. That's according to 9 out of 10 Internet of Secure things. I want to thank, of course, my panelist, Lou Maresca. We always love having him on the show. We thank him very much for stopping by. But my good friends who have been with me since episode 1, starting with Mr. Curtis Franklin. Curtis Franklin of Information Week Radio. What are you up to? I know you're finishing up Interop, you're heading home tomorrow, but what's next on your slate?
Well, I am indeed flying tomorrow. I get back to the swamp in a couple of days, and next week I'll be there doing a lot of audio editing and writing based on things that we've heard this week. And then the next week I'm out again. In 2 weeks I will be in Orlando at SAP's Sapphire Now conference. That's their biggest international gathering of SAP engineers, executives, and customers. So should have some interesting stuff for Twiat in a couple of weeks based on that.
Fantastic. It's always good to have you on the ground. Speaking on the ground, you don't get much more in the ground than actually on the floor, speaking to the engineers and working on the projects for Interop Labs. Chee, always a pleasure, my friend. It's always good to see you. It's always good to hear from you. And I thank you for making time, because this has been an absolute whirlwind of a week for you. Could you please tell the folks at home where they can find your work, where they can find your internet presence?
Well, there's going to be an article appearing in InfoWorld very soon, and it's about my IT tools, MacGyver tools for the IT professional, and that's going to be showing up probably in a week or so. One of the other things is if you're on Interop, you might want to consider coming to my last class. I have the last class of the day in the InteropNet classroom. Feel free, come on down. I'm going to be throwing packets of Kona coffee at people that ask really good questions.
Oh, so if you're in Las Vegas and you want some Chee lovin' that's caffeinated, make sure to head over to Interop. Gentlemen, thank you thank you all for being here. You know I wouldn't want to do Twiet without you. Of course, I also want to thank you. That's right, our loyal listener, our loyal watcher, the person who comes back week after week and downloads our show. We couldn't do This Week in Enterprise Tech without you, and we want to make it easier for you to enjoy the work that we enjoy so much. Just go to our show page at twit.tv/Twiet. Once you're there, you'll find all of our back episodes along with show notes, and you'll also find a little drop-down menu where you can subscribe. Did you know that you can get the audio version automatically every week in your iPhone? You could get the video version in your Android tablet. You could get the high-definition video version for your desktop, your laptop, your Roku. We give you every which way to enjoy the show because, well, we love you. Also, don't forget that we do this show every Friday at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time. If you join us at live.twit.tv, you can actually see us put the show together. That's pre-show, that's post-show, that's everything in between. That's how the sausage is made. It's part of the experiment that is Twit TV. Also, as long as you're watching live, why not jump into our live chat room at irc.twit.tv. Once you're in, you'll be able to ask questions to our guests. You'll be able to keep up with the flow of the show. And yes, every once in a while, you come up with a comment that inspires the host. So again, irc.twit.tv. Finally, I want to thank everyone here who makes this show possible. Of course, to Lisa and Leo for letting us to continue doing This Week in Enterprise Tech. And Karsten, my super producer. And, of course, the TD without whom I would be lost, Mr. Brian Cranky Hippo Burnett. Brian, you know, you did a surprisingly okay job today.
Thanks, Padre. I appreciate it. Especially since you told me to play the video and then not to play the video and then to play the video again.
You know what?
Oh, whoops.
That's what you get for messing up
Spoiled
our
it.
Brian Chee surprise. I'm just saying.
His
I'm
mic
just saying.
worked really well today, too.
Yes, it does. Chee, could you please tell the folks what you actually do here at Twit?
Well, when I'm not TDing this show, I TD Screensavers, and we also do a how-to show together. Actually, we talked about the difference between server motors and stepper motors today.
I don't remember.
You don't remember any of that?
No, I
Just
don't.
like a little bit?
Not
We
really
just
sure
did it like an hour ago.
Not sure what you're talking about.
Okay. Well, you can also follow me at cranky_hippo on Twitter.
Yes, and don't forget that you can follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/PadreSJ. Again, a great place to follow what I do outside of the studio and to suggest topics and guests for future episodes. Until next time, I'm Father Robert Ballecer, the digital Jesuit, just reminding you that if you want to know what's going on in the Enterprise, just keep quiet.